My name is Richard Tyler from Hogan Lovells. I'm pleased to have with me this morning Philip Lowe, who is head of DG Energy for the Commission. He's just made his presentation at the Flame Gas Conference. Philip, the Commission has published an EU energy roadmap setting out pathways for carbon reduction to 2020. Looking at this at a gas conference, can you tell us how you see the future role for gas?
Well, we see gas playing an increasingly important role for the next 20 years. Gas, as you know, is far less consuming of CO2 than coal, and in principle one should see a move towards gas, because it is the one source of energy apart from coal at the moment which is not benefiting from public support in any way. And so it is a commercial default choice, providing that the long-term perspectives are regarded as good. And our view is, from the modelling we have done, is that the situation is relatively clear for gas until 2030, 2035. Then the question mark arises: can we see gas as part of a final fuel mix in the European Union, or without carbon capture and storage? And it's this issue which may not be needed to be addressed now, but within 10 years' time it'll become a really important issue. If we indeed see what we think likely, that is CCGT, gas generation for electricity, will be part of the mix. It's an obvious complement to renewables energy in any event. We'd like to think that storage technologies could develop considerably to deal with intermittency, but gas is a flexible source of energy and electricity generation. So we see it playing a very substantial role, at least until 2035.
That's very interesting. Do you think the interventions that we see by both EU and national governments in energy policy, and the uncertainty that causes, actually threatens the case for new investment in gas?
Well, I think if we speculate about policy, we destroy trust and credibility in the public policies which have been established. I think there's been a clear direction of European and national policies since 2008 and 2009, which has been to say, listen, we need to do something about climate change, and we need to do it in two directions. First of all, by having targets for reduction of CO2 over a 40-year period, and secondly, we've got to stimulate the technologies which for renewable, for generation through renewables, which will give us the chance of meeting the challenge in a way which will be acceptable to a large proportion of the European public. If the whole of the European public were in favour of nuclear energy, perhaps this problem would not be so important. But frankly, one can see that a lot of concern and opposition, particularly since Fukushima, to the use of nuclear energy. We think that once the lessons are drawn from Fukushima and the nuclear industry adapts to the changes necessary, that nuclear will play a role, but that leaves a tremendous gap to be filled, either with renewables or with coal or gas for CCS, with CCS.
Okay, talking about coal and gas, can you explain why, with emission reductions targets in place and those policy objectives, that in the last few years we've actually been seeing coal gain market share against gas and actually produce the opposite result from which the policy was presumably intended?
Well, I think the first of all, there is an existing asset base of capacity for in coal-fired power stations, which, as long as those stations can can be operated without infringing any other environmental rules, that opportunity is going to be seized upon when the market when market players see that that's the most profitable way of generating electricity. The second reason is that the market-based instrument which we chose, the European Union chose to promote renewable technologies, apart from the direct support to subsidies, through subsidies and feed-in tariffs, has been the ETS price. It's a market-based instrument, there's an economic recession going on, and the price comes down. So it's no longer providing, in our view, the long-term signals for investment that would normally have been the case in economic conditions 5 years ago. So in the absence of any incentives for new investments in renewable technologies except through public subsidy, the only alternatives for many generators is to say, well, listen, I'm going to produce coal, I'm going to produce electricity with the least cost form of energy of generation I've got, and it's coal for the moment.
Yeah.
That's a very short-term effect. It is not. It looks bad in terms of our long-term
Absolutely.
objectives, but that's the market working, perhaps turning its nose up a bit about the long-term objectives, saying, listen, something's gone wrong here. Maybe it has gone wrong, but if we, as Mr. Tyson of Aon has pointed out many times already, we have to do something about the signal which ETS is given. The question is how to intervene now in a way which doesn't, again, create more uncertainty by speculation about a change in regime. I think
do you think there's an opportunity to do that at some point?
I think the attention is now focused on what we do in 2030, 2020, 25, 2030. We've got a fairly clear regime from now until 2020. We've got emissions targets reduction, which we're likely to meet at the moment for 2020, not least because of the recession. We've got a renewables target which is going to be met unevenly across the European Union. Denmark, Spain, Germany, significant contributions, Sweden, Finland, Austria through hydro or through biomass, very important. Other countries slower, but we're going to meet that. We're not very good at energy efficiency in Europe. We don't invest in it. We don't realize the costs of not investing it. But I think that the issue of the ETS, the function of the ETS, will have to be addressed at least in that long-term context. Whether fixing it short-term is a good thing or not is something which has to be looked at very closely. Fixing it short-term is the risk is piling a government failure on a market failure, and we don't want to do that.
Okay. I want to move the conversation on to talk about security of supplying gas, if you see gas being around as an important element of the fuel mix for the next 20 years, at least up until 2030. Can you tell me about the Commission's role in that, and how important do you think the new infrastructure projects are from Caspian, for instance, and how the Commission can play a positive role in facilitating those new projects and very large investments required?
Exactly. Well, I think the major role that the European Union as an institution can play, and its individual member states, is to give commercial investors some degree of predictability and security about the political environment in which they would be operating in if they went ahead with these investments. And that is not to say that it's either for governments or for the European Union to dictate the profitability of any particular scheme. The original scheme for the Southern Corridor was Nabucco, with a particular design. We were asked as a European Commission, as a European Union, to give support to that. That was provided, was promised, and is still promised.
Okay.
But a number of other alternatives have been put forward. The issue of scalability has become very important for investors. If we can't justify filling a pipe as big as the original Nabucco one now, can we think about a size of pipe which we could scale up to a final figure later on? And that final figure will include the forecast of the prediction would be that if the new connection across Turkey was in place, then we would be able to accommodate the additional supplies from not just Azerbaijan but Turkmenistan if the Caspian developments progress successfully.
I guess the question of scalability is a question of when the upstream supply sources actually become available, and when the links in the infrastructure are actually established. And if those can't all be established together, presumably you have to build a smaller pipe in the first place.
Well, I think there are issues to be addressed at both ends of the pipe, because certainly the promoters of Shah Deniz and those who are involved in Turkmenistan would say, well, listen, we would be ready to go, but we need certainty about transit, and we need certainty about the final price which we will eventually get on the market in Europe for our gas once the reserves have been started to be exploited and the transit capacities are there. And there are uncertainties at both ends at the moment. There's uncertainties because of the recessionary conditions in Europe. So there is a worry about whether the returns from this diversification of supplies would be adequate, bearing in mind too that we're having quite a diversion of gas from other. Necessarily, the profitability of new pipelines has to be looked at very carefully by the operators. Now, what is the government's role in that? Do we start calculating ourselves how much the profitability of these projects? Our answer is no. We try and provide what we're asked to provide, which is legal, political framework which gives stability to the investments concerned and protection to them. But we leave the promoters and their partners downstream the decision as to what precise design would be preferable.
Do you think the regulations, for instance, in the third package on pipelines, which bring forward possibly a more restrictive attitude to the granting of third-party access restrictions, bring in the requirement for development of an EU-wide network code. Do you think those actually provide extra complication which makes it more difficult for these major pipeline projects to be realised?
Well, we would be worried about it if it was actually frustrating investment decisions. But there have always been exemptions on third-party access and on unbundling for new investments which bring in new sources of new supplies along new routes or new sources of supply. And the only question which needs to be looked at each time on these exemptions for new investments, which can last for 15, 20 years, to allow people to get the full return from their investments, is where the new link is actually bringing in more gas into a national market where the promoter of the actual project, who is bringing in even more, is already in a dominant position on the market. Yeah. And therefore the effect of unbridled derogation for this new investment would be to evacuate any possibility of competition on that market forever. Now, we don't like that.
No, clearly.
But we are concerned to make sure that new investments should not be frustrated. We're on record as saying that while we don't particularly favour South Stream as a project from the point of view of EU energy policy, because it doesn't really lead to any significant diversion of diversification of supplies, and it seems less cost effective than other routes. Nevertheless, we would not put any obstacle in its way, but we would help regulators and coordinate regulators in order to facilitate the project. Which clearly, if the promoters concerned believe it's going to be useful for them, for either security of supply or security of demand points of view, or from profitability point of view, we will do our utmost to make sure that the process is simplified.
Okay, Philip, one final question. I think it's clear to a lot of those involved at this conference that the Northwestern Europe market has become pretty liberalised and is getting more and more liquid hubs and integrated. Right. How long do you think, and what do you think the process will be to join southern areas of Europe to that, and southeastern Europe? How do you see that playing out?
Well, it's going to take a bit more time. We've got a structure of the industry which was quite different from, say, Belgium or the Netherlands or the UK as the primary of countries which took the lead in promoting competition in gas in the northwestern area of Europe. Several of our member states have only one source of gas, pipeline gas from Russia. We believe that a lot's been done already to interconnect those countries with the rest of the European Union, but not enough to promote a real contestability to one form of energy. We don't believe that promoting competition and reinforcing the interconnections, pushing through with reverse flow physically or virtually, is in any way damaging to any competitor, including Russian competitors, because they benefit from the same advantage throughout the European Union. So we're going to push on with that and make it work throughout Europe. But I'm not going to put on a timeline as to how many further grey hairs I would get from that process, because it's a tough job.
Philip Lowe, thank you very much indeed.